turns out you can change the pack leader, but a leopard sadly does not change its spots. Welcome to Bristol, welcome to Ashton Gate. Norwich City have suffered yet another defeat, their second consecutive loss after what was a 3-0 defeat to Burnley last week. And hopefully you can hear me, and I'm coming through loud and clear because we've had a couple of issues with the Wi-Fi here this afternoon. But hopefully that's not going to be the case for this broadcast, or maybe it might be, and that will spare you from the damaging words that I'm going to say. Look, this is I don't usually start with this, but I'm going to start with a kind of overall reflection on where Norwich City are. I think increasingly with every week that passes, be it win, be it defeat, it's becoming increasingly obvious that this Norwich City group needs to rebuild, that what they are doing at this moment in time isn't translating to success. And I think actually in many ways their current situation is epitomised by what we saw this afternoon, where you've got Kieran Dow coming off and Liam Gibbs being pushed into an advanced right midfield role. I know he can play as an attacking midfielder, but he hasn't done, certainly at senior level for Norwich City yet. And that for me exposes the issues that you've got at the moment in terms of an unbalanced squad, players not fulfilling their potential, an absolute cacophony of individual errors, and just a team that is consistently inconsistent, and a team that is looking up at the playoffs consistently, and it feels like a long way. It's only 4 points in reality, but in terms of the performance levels at this moment in time, Norwich City are not at the levels, and haven't been at the levels this season to have a look over the piece to suggest that they are capable of finishing inside the top six. It's interesting because I've just spoken to Andrew Ramadelli, and he referenced this squad being the best in the Championship. People in the past have referenced this squad being the best in the Championship. This squad is not the best in the Championship, but it's certainly better than 10th in the Championship, which is where they currently find themselves. And today kind of exasperates their issues and exposes them viciously, really. And I think, and that's why I think it's probably been something that everyone's kind of known for a while, that actually the reset button is going to have to be pressed. There is going to have to be a rebuild. There is going to have to be a seismic overhaul for this Norwich City project to move forward again, or at least feel like it's going to move forward again. And by the way, that feels irrespective of the outcome of this season and how it transpires from here. If Norwich went on to win the playoffs and somehow in some kind of mystical land were able to return to the Premier League, they would need to churn the squad and rebuild the squad. If they finish inside the playoffs but lose, they would need to churn and rebuild the squad. And if they sit where they sit at this moment in time, and increasingly feels like they're kind of anywhere between about 8th and about 12th at this moment in time, if they finish in that bracket, then it's quite obvious to me and to everyone else that Norwich City need a real rebuild. And I think it's something that we've not really spoken about out loud. And actually, I was thinking, just whilst I was waiting for Andrew Ramadelli down there, you look at where Norwich City are at the moment, and you almost want to compare that back to 2017, when they had John Ruddy, they had Russell Martin, they had players who had been at the club for a long time. Johnny Howson, another one. We could go through and list a few. Cameron Jerome, Wes Houlihan. Players who had been here for a while, had longevity. But and again, I'm not accusing any of players of feeling any way. They would have to talk for themselves. But it just feels like it's gone a little bit stale at the moment. And you look at, so that was the case in 2017. You now look at Norwich, where they are. They have Tim Krul, who has been playing in goal up to today, Grant Hanley, Max Aarons at right back, Kenny McLean, Teemu Pukki. We could list several others. Players who have been through cycles here at this football club, endured real highs and lows. And a spine of the team that just feels quite tired. And I've used this expression before, and I think a lot of people maybe feel that it's criticising for the sake of criticising, but it's not. It's just a reflection of how it feels at this moment in time. And there's a whole, there's a whole range of factors as to why this feeling is still in place. But it kind of feels like we're back in the same cycle that Norwich were before they hired Daniel Farke, when they split and went to a sporting director model, where they've got players on Premier League money who have signed in the Premier League, who've come down to the Championship, who have failed to live up to the expectations that people have set for them. And ultimately, if that is the case, you have to change. And this is where I have a huge amount of sympathy for David Wagner, because he's walked into a situation where there's a group there that's unbelievably low on confidence, like so low on confidence it's untrue. And you see that in their play because they're not making good decisions, because they're overthinking stuff. They're playing passes blind. They're trying to almost play the safe option, but in doing so, they're making really bad errors. And that makes them quite predictable. So from a coaching aspect, you can implement any system. You can try and create a sense of energy and purpose. But to do that, you need to have players and an environment of people that believe they are able to make those errors, but also that it's not going to cost them on a week-to-week basis. And at the moment, this group just feels like it's a little bit stuck and in a little bit of a sense of rebuild. It feels like there's some cobwebs in the corner and the duster needs to come out and sweep them away, and there needs to be some freshness installed. And for David Wagner, it's incredibly difficult because he's trying to implement a tactical style which is highly complex, and there were some issues with it today, and I'm going to go on to talk about those. But it feels increasingly like the position that he is in now is quite similar to that kind of lull that Norwich had between 2017 and the start of 2017. I mean 2016, don't I? I do mean 2016. You all knew what I meant. I'll blame the tiredness of this long journey to Bristol for that. But it feels like with the start of that kind of era again, and when Daniel Farker came in and kind of had to implement a style, and there was a process of building, and it feels like we're there again. It feels like it needs stripping back. And this kind of line that is being perpetuated by the squad of players or by fans or by anyone that maybe feels this is the best squad in the Championship, they're certainly not performing in that way. And they haven't performed that way all season. And the evidence, I'm afraid, just is not there. And what we are seeing now is the club in a state where it needs to change and it needs to evolve and it needs to build again. And David Wagner has to be able to now mould this group of players to what he needs. And it's exemplified. They've got an unbalanced squad. And we've seen that today, and we've seen that even after wins, to be fair. And I think actually, if you've asked a lot of people after the Preston and the Coventry games if this group needed a real refresh and a real change, I think a lot of them would have said yes. Because of what they've seen and the evidence that's built up this season. And you see it all the time in terms of teams that come down that are so weighted with players who maybe don't feel they should be at the level, or the level is such a culture shock to them because they've come in from elsewhere. They aren't at the Premier League, and actually getting their heads around that can be quite difficult. And then actually, if you start making errors at this level, that's where the self-doubt, that's where the problems begin to creep in. And I think we're all of those things we are seeing now, and we're seeing the result of some really poor recruitment decisions. We're seeing a core of the team that is ageing and that has been emotionally invested in quite a lot around Norwich City for a period of time. They've had real success, they've had real disappointment, and actually both of those things can end up leaving you a little bit numb, to be honest. And that's another aspect. And then you've got really some players who, and I've certainly put Max Aarons into this category, who maybe should have moved on and haven't quite taken that window. And again, that's not a criticism of Max Aarons. I'm sure if you got him in a quiet moment, he would probably say the same. This was not the plan for him to still be at Norwich City. But all of this kind of underpins where Norwich are at the moment, where this just needs to be a reset. And look, obviously, whilst the playoffs are still attainable and it's 4 points, and look, there is a possibility that Norwich win their next 4 games, they end up in the top 6 and everything feels rosy again. But again, kind of from my view, irrespective of what happens now in terms of outcome at the end of the season, there does need to be a change in terms of the playing personnel. Let's look at this game then, because this was really interesting. Not good interesting as in kind of interesting how it panned out. The first half, Norwich was so poor. There's so many unforced errors in possession. Some of that is kind of what it leans into what I spoke about there in the opening 10 minutes of this record. But also there were some structural problems. I feel that playing with 2 strikers at this moment in time is really hindering what Norwich City are trying to do. Josh Sargent, and again, it's not a personal criticism of him. I think, again, it's partly down to structure. He's struggling to grapple with that kind of false 9 role, that deeper role that he's being asked to play. And because Kenny McLean's then dropping between the centre-backs to try and build up the play and create this kind of back three and the full-backs push on, actually, there are times that you watch Norwich City and there's a real vacuum in the middle of the pitch. It's essentially sometimes only Gabriel Sara. And I think he's got potential to be one of the best players in this division if they can find a level of form within him. But he's certainly not good enough that he can be the midfield by himself. And because Norwich essentially have a building up with a back three, the full-backs push on, you end up with kind of this position where you've got a free, you've got the 2 wide kind of wing-backs playing on the halfway line trying to receive the ball, You've got Gabriel Sara in that middle space, but he's often occupied by 3 or 4 opposition players who are playing in a block. And then you've got almost a line of Norwich City attackers. And that is making life really difficult for them to build up. You're essentially asking for a huge amount of individual quality or a player to break that down of their own accord, to essentially go on some kind of miraculous run to beat 3 or 4 players. That's really difficult. And look, historically, if you look at David Wagner's managerial career, coaching career, this has been a criticism that has been levelled at him a few times, that his teams do or can have problems building up for this kind of issue. So actually, kind of my view is that, look, let's pull Sargent out of there. Let's have a midfielder alongside Gabriel Sara. Let's put a 2 in there. That allows, when McLean drops in, it allows one to go slightly higher, one to come deeper, and I think they will have more joy playing out. And actually, they kind of, and again, what that does when you have that vacuum in the middle of the pitch, and Bristol City really benefited from it today, is when the ball gets turned over, you have so many free options in the centre of the pitch just to kind of wipe through, and almost that back three, which is kind of being built to negate the fact that if Norwich give the ball away, they can then kind of control the counter-attack, simply isn't functioning because they're getting a whole wave of players coming towards them. And I felt it helped in the second half when they brought El Hernandez on, and it kind of freed them up a little bit, but it makes life really difficult for them, and that is where the structural stuff is more difficult. And look, I said right from the start that there are going to be days where Norwich City are going to try and play in the style that David Wagner wants them to, and it's going to look really dodgy, and it's going to look really difficult, and it's going to be quite disjointed. And that is kind of a byproduct of the process that Norwich City are in, which again leans into kind of my first segment in terms of where Norwich City currently are as a football club and maybe the need for a little bit of churn. So you tactically, I think they really struggled with that. And then what that does is creates a lot of isolation for players in possession. So, okay, you've got that mentality that I spoke about earlier on, which is kind of lingering, and that kind of chronic lack of confidence, but you've also got a lack of passing options. And so players are having to force passes forward or risk passes that they shouldn't be risking, and that leads to errors, and that leads to moments where the ball gets turned over, and that leads to opportunities for opposition teams to counter-attack, and it's what we saw Burnley exploit so well last weekend, and that's why we saw Bristol City look so dangerous on the counter-attack as what they did today. So, again, some of this is teething issues. Some of it, I think, just where they are at this moment in time, they just need to pull an attacking player out and put them into that kind of midfield area, that central zone, if you like. And there's no reason why, when that ball gets bypassed, they cannot go and fulfil the same role. But certainly when the ball is in their own third, ultimately either it's going out wide to the wing backs, and they're inviting a press onto themselves, which then they have to try and relieve a long ball, which a lot of the time, because of the personnel they've got up there, Kieran Dow, Tamer Pukki, it was obviously Josh Sargent and Marcelino Nunez. Really, you've got Josh Sargent up there who can win a header, so it becomes then difficult when you try and loft the ball out and play over that kind of press to build something. So the build-up aspect of their play at this moment in time is really leaving quite a bit to be desired. And look, there's an element as well, and it happens at all levels of football, where because of the amount of resource and the amount of analysis now, what Norwich City are trying to do is not a shock to anybody. And teams are setting up now to counter that and to nullify threats and in order to stop them from playing. And we saw Bristol City do it again today. And look, David Wagner's not going to change, and Norwich City aren't going to change. So the quality of what they are doing has to change, and they have to make little tweaks in order to make themselves have a better opportunity for success, to make those kind of errors and unforced moments fewer and far between them. What we're seeing at the moment, it was with real regularity they were giving the ball away in the first half, and that completely prevents them from playing in the way that they want to play and building up in the way they want to build up. The game itself, look, it's been decided by a goal. I have to see it back. David Wagner felt it was a foul in real time. I felt that it wasn't, but again, I haven't seen it back. But Dow gets penalised. It kind of turns into traffic again. Goes to play into that central zone, and suddenly gets swarmed by 5 or 6 opposition bodies. There's a lack of passing options. Bristol City then break. The ball works its way out to Sykes. Yanulis is recovering at a full stretch. That becomes very difficult to close off that kind of passing lane. And it's a really, really poor error from Angus Gunn. And actually, for all of kind of the talk of the goalkeeper debate, Angus Gunn was obviously brought in today. I felt that was the right decision before the game. I still feel it was the right decision now. But actually, this is kind of a byproduct of constantly changing that position. Because when you change goalkeepers, and it's the same for Tim Krul when he would have came in, there is some rustiness. There is an element of mistakes that creep in because they don't have that kind of regularity and that match fitness that they maybe require. That's not an excuse as to why Angus Gunn did not save that shot, because look, he should be, and I'm sure he would be honest enough to reflect that. But ultimately, the worst thing Norwich City could do now is to revert back, to make that change again, and just to kind of switch between the two between now and the end of the season. If this decision has been made, the decision needs to be stuck by now, and Angus Gunn needs to have a run of games in the same way that Tim Krul got. Because actually, if you look at the data and the evidence, that type of mistake hasn't been frequent from Angus Gunn, whereas the ones that perhaps we've been talking about in relation to Tim Krul probably have been. And look, Norwich were blunt today. They lacked attacking thrust. They lacked creativity. They had one shot on target. You've got Tammy Pukki, bless him, who's got absolutely no service. He's drifting into wide channels and trying to win corners and trying to make something from nothing. He looks quite frustrated. He's obviously out of contract in the summer. At this moment in time, it feels really unlikely that he's going to stay beyond the summer unless by some miracle Norwich City we're going to be able to get themselves up to the Premier League. I find the criticism of him completely baffling, if I'm honest, because, again, you look at the lack of service that this Norwich City team is currently, or that he is playing in and suffering from. The fact he has scored as many goals that he has this season is a credit to the player that he is. And I don't really feel that his game has changed drastically or dropped off a cliff drastically, actually. He's just playing in a worse Norwich City team that isn't playing to his strengths in the same way that perhaps previous editions have. And so you end up probably feeling quite sympathetic to him, actually. He produced actually the only shot of the game, only shot on target of the game, where he kind of jinked past the defender in the first half, tried to catch O'Leary out at the near post, but produced a good save. Beyond that, it was a really difficult afternoon. David Wagner, Norwich had a goal, wasn't ruled out because the flag was up long before Adam Ida got across the centre half to put the ball in, but David Wagner felt that was tighter than certainly it looked in real time, where he looked onside again, offside. Sorry, I haven't seen it back. But yeah, there we go. It's a sticky old situation, isn't it? And of course now they go back to Carrow Road on Tuesday, and they've got to right this, and they've got to prove actually that they can find some consistency and that they can put a run together between now and the end of the season, and actually they can create that energy and rediscover that energy that we saw in the opening two games that has been really severely lacking in the last two. Marquinhos had a slight injury. Crystal Solis stayed at home, stayed at Colney to get some more fitness into his legs. I think that's probably the right decision. They probably could have done with him, actually, in terms of how this game panned out, but I think it probably is the better decision for the long term to get him back to speed, because he looked quite short last week when he came on, I felt. Yeah, and that's it. Now we go on to Hull on Tuesday night and Wigan, and it feels like two really important games. It feels like games now increasingly that Norwich City needs 6 points from. And that's before you kind of consider the fact they're playing at home. So we'll see how it goes. Plenty more analysis, plenty more reaction to come across our channels. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I tried not to make it too negative because I think it's easy to lean into that. I think hopefully I've wrapped enough context in around this, and hopefully you can kind of understand where I'm coming from, even maybe if you don't necessarily agree with it. But there we go. Final word, actually, the away end, which is there, was absolutely packed to 2,300 Norwich City fans. They didn't stop singing all afternoon. They deserved a lot more than what they saw today, but probably all season as well. I wish them all a really safe trip back to Norfolk. Of course, thank you all very much for watching. I'll leave it there. Time to start the long journey home. Thank you very much for watching. See you soon.